At first, it felt like the most intimate and easy thing in the world. Every night, she welcomed him into her space, his body pressed against hers like a perfect match. His warmth seeped into her skin, and his steady breathing lulled her into the deepest, most peaceful sleep. The bond between them felt sacred, moments of light, gentle touch that brought comfort and a sense of belonging. But soon, something changed. Her body, once strong and vibrant, began to feel drained, fragile, as if it were being slowly consumed by an invisible force. The fatigue was consuming everything, a relentless weight she couldn't shake. Every morning when she woke up, the exhaustion deepened, settling like a shadow in the hollow of her chest. It was as if every moment together was silently draining her, and she couldn't understand why. The love that had once been so pure began to turn into something unrecognizable. Please like and subscribe to the channel so we can start digging into the truth of this story. The feeling of stepping into your own place is supposed to be exhilarating, but for Linda, it came with an unexpected weight. The excitement of having her first apartment was quickly overshadowed by an overwhelming silence that filled the space, a silence that seemed deafening after years of sharing spaces with roommates. The once vibrant chatter, the sounds of life happening around her, were gone. Now the only thing she could hear was the hum of the city outside her windows and the beating of her own heart as she unpacked the last of her boxes. This was her space, but it didn't feel like home yet. It was the kind of feeling Linda hadn't anticipated. She had spent so much time longing for independence, for a place that was truly hers, but she hadn't thought about how much she'd missed the constant buzz of human presence. There was a strange emptiness in the air that was hard to ignore. As she sank into her couch that evening, she couldn't help but feel the absence of someone or something to share it with. She needed companionship, something to fill the space around her, to break the silence. From the very beginning, Max had been a model dog, calm, loyal, and always by Linda's side. The German shepherd she had rescued from the animal shelter quickly adapted to his new home. He found comfort in the space, and so did Linda. Their companionship grew effortlessly. But over time, something began to change. Something subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. Max, the dog who had always greeted Linda with boundless energy, began to retreat into his own world. His once enthusiastic tail wags became weak flickers. His once alert eyes became clouded and dull. At first, Linda chalked it up to the fact that Max was still settling into his new home. Maybe he was tired, adjusting to the change in his life. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that something more was happening. Max, the dog who used to meet her at the door with excitement, was now lying lethargically on the couch. His breathing was heavier than usual, almost labored, and occasionally a soft cough would break the silence. Linda couldn't ignore it. She watched Max more closely, wondering if he was just tired or if something was seriously wrong. Meanwhile, Linda was beginning to feel the same exhaustion creeping into her own life. What started as a slight sense of tiredness became a full-blown wave of fatigue that took over her every day. She struggled to get out of bed in the morning, her limbs feeling heavy and unwilling to cooperate. Every step felt like a burden, and as the day wore on, a dull headache would settle behind her eyes, making it hard to concentrate on anything. Even simple tasks felt like monumental efforts. At work, her boss had started to comment on her lack of energy, asking if she was okay. "I'm fine," she would say, forcing a smile. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. It was hard for Linda to reconcile the strange fatigue that was overtaking her with the fact that she was getting plenty of sleep. At night, she would curl up with Max, hoping the comfort of their routine would bring her some relief. Yet each morning, she woke up feeling worse. Her mind would struggle to shake off the exhaustion, and the weight of it all seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Linda couldn't ignore the connection anymore. Max's change in behavior mirrored her own decline. It was as though they were going through the same thing, struggling with the same fatigue, the same weakness. She didn't know if it was a coincidence, but it felt like it couldn't be. It seemed impossible that her perfectly healthy, active dog would suddenly be as sluggish and lethargic as she felt. And yet, there they were, both of them, struggling. Linda's mind raced. Was there something in the apartment? Had she overlooked something? Maybe it was stress, she told herself, but deep down, she knew it was something more. The more she watched Max, the more worried she became. His slow movements and heavy breathing weren't normal. It was as if the life had been drained from him, just like it had been from her. One day, after a particularly rough night of feeling even worse than usual, Linda confided in her best friend, Sarah. "I don't know what's going on," Linda admitted, her voice tight with concern. "Max has been off, and I feel like I'm just not right. I'm always exhausted, and it's getting worse every day." Sarah, looking concerned, took a long look at Linda, and then at Max, who was curled up on the couch, barely lifting his head. "You both look terrible," Sarah said bluntly. "You need to see a doctor, both of you." It was then that Linda realized how much she had been ignoring the signs. Maybe it wasn't just stress. Something had to be wrong, something that was affecting both of them. As Linda sat in the waiting room at the veterinary clinic, with Max by her side, she could feel the weight of the situation settling deeper in her chest. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just Max. It was her, too. Something was wrong, and they both needed help. The feeling of helplessness gnawed at Linda. But as she sat there, watching Max's eyes flutter with exhaustion, she realized that sometimes the strongest connections don't just help us feel better, they also warn us when things aren't right. Something had happened to both of them, and Linda knew they couldn't keep ignoring the truth much longer. She had to figure it out. For both of them. It wasn't until Sarah saw her that Linda truly realized how bad things had gotten. They'd been friends for years, through everything from college breakups to work stress, and nothing had ever seemed quite as off as it did now. When Sarah walked into their favorite coffee shop and looked at Linda with wide eyes, concern written all over her face, Linda could feel something shift in the air. "Linda," Sarah said, her voice flat with worry. "You look terrible." Linda laughed it off, giving her best friend the same forced smile she had been wearing for weeks. "Just tired," she muttered. But Sarah didn't seem convinced. The smile faded from Sarah's face as she set down her coffee, her gaze never leaving Linda. "You've lost weight," she said. "Your skin looks pale. Are you eating? And look at those dark circles under your eyes. You look like a zombie." Linda's smile slipped. She wanted to dismiss it, tell Sarah she was overreacting. But something in Sarah's tone, the seriousness of her words, made Linda hesitate. "I'm fine," Linda said weakly. "I'm just stressed, you know. Work's been crazy." Sarah wasn't having it. "Work stress doesn't make you look like this. You're always tired, you've lost your appetite, and it's not just you. What about Max? Doesn't he seem off too? You two are both acting like something's wrong." Linda froze at the mention of Max. She had been so focused on her own declining health that she hadn't thought about his behavior in the same way. But now, as Sarah pointed it out, Linda couldn't ignore it anymore. Max, her usually energetic German shepherd, had been sluggish lately too. He wasn't greeting her at the door with the usual excitement. His tail barely wagged, and he was always lying down, breathing heavily. "You're right," Linda admitted softly, her voice trembling. "Max hasn't been himself. He's been so tired, and his breathing's been weird. I just thought he was adjusting to the new place, but now I'm not so sure." Sarah didn't hold back. "Linda, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You both are showing the same symptoms. Something's not right, and you need to see a doctor." Linda's instinct was to push it off. She had a million reasons why she couldn't deal with it. Work, stress, and honestly, the idea of going to the doctor and getting poked and prodded felt overwhelming. But as Sarah's words lingered, Linda couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her stomach. What if Sarah was right? What if there was something more to it than just stress? A wave of exhaustion hit Linda as she sipped her coffee, and she suddenly felt like she might pass out right there. She had been feeling this way for weeks, so tired, her body heavy, her mind foggy. She'd chalked it up to stress, thinking that if she just got more sleep, it would go away. But nothing was changing. It was getting worse. And now Max, her dog, her companion, wasn't acting right either. Could it be something environmental? Could it be the apartment? The thought hit Linda like a ton of bricks. "Maybe I should make an appointment," Linda said finally, her voice quiet. "I'll call tomorrow. I'll get checked out." Sarah looked at her with an expression of both relief and concern. "Good, and don't wait too long, okay?" She paused, giving Linda a serious look. "You've been ignoring the signs, but you can't keep doing that. You and Max both need help, and I think it's time to face the truth." Linda couldn't help but feel a rush of gratitude for her best friend. Sarah's blunt honesty, while jarring, was exactly what she needed. She had been too wrapped up in her own exhaustion to see how bad it had really gotten. She had assumed everything would go away on its own, but now, with Sarah's words echoing in her mind, Linda knew she couldn't keep ignoring the obvious. As she left the coffee shop that day, Linda's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Her health was deteriorating, Max was sick too, and there had to be a reason for it. Maybe it was time to stop ignoring the problem and finally get the answers she needed. Maybe it wasn't just stress. Maybe it was something else. Something that had been affecting both her and Max all along. It was time to act before things got any worse. Linda's heart raced as she watched Dr. Hayes gently examine Max. Her German shepherd, once full of life and energy, now lay still on the cold examination table, barely reacting to the vet's touch. Linda had been worried for weeks, but it wasn't until Max's condition worsened, his breathing becoming labored, his once enthusiastic tail barely lifting, that she finally made the decision to bring him in. Max had always been her companion, her best friend. But now, as he lay there with dull eyes and slow movements, Linda's concern deepened. She glanced nervously at the vet, hoping for an explanation, anything that would make sense of the troubling changes she had witnessed in Max. As Dr. Hayes finished his examination, he straightened up, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Max shows signs of mild toxicity," he said, his voice calm but serious. "His fatigue, sluggishness, and labored breathing indicate something is off. It's likely he's been exposed to something that's affecting his system, but it's not severe yet." Linda's stomach dropped. She had hoped for something simpler, maybe a cold or something temporary. But this felt more serious. "Toxicity," she echoed, struggling to wrap her head around the idea. "What do you mean by that?" Dr. Hayes looked at her with concern. "Well, we need to run a few more tests to pinpoint what's causing it, but it could be environmental. The symptoms Max is showing are consistent with low-level poisoning. It could be anything from food poisoning to exposure to some kind of toxins in your home. But don't worry, it's not life-threatening right now." Linda felt her breath catch. "In my home?" she asked, a sense of dread creeping into her chest. "Could it really be something in my apartment?" The vet nodded. "It's possible. You've mentioned that you've been feeling unwell too. Exhausted, headaches, dizziness. The fact that both you and Max are showing these symptoms around the same time makes me suspect there might be something in your apartment affecting both of you." Linda stared at Max, who seemed to perk up slightly at the sound of his name, his eyes following her every move, but still too weak to show his usual excitement. This was more than just stress or a change in routine. This was something deeper, something she hadn't considered before. Could it be the place she had called home for the past few months? Could something in the environment be poisoning them both without them realizing it? The thought was terrifying. I didn't even think about that, Linda admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been so focused on Max, I didn't connect the dots between how he's been acting and how I've been feeling. Dr. Hayes gave her a sympathetic look. It happens more often than you think, he said, especially with things like toxins. The symptoms are easy to dismiss: headaches, fatigue, nausea. They seem so normal when you're busy, but when both you and your pet show signs at the same time, it's a red flag. Linda nodded slowly, the weight of the situation starting to sink in. She had been brushing off her symptoms, blaming everything on work stress or long hours. But now, with Max's condition mirroring her own, Linda couldn't deny that something more was going on. "What should I do next?" she asked, her voice tight. The uncertainty, the worry about her dog and herself, was almost too much to bear. "For Max," Dr. Hayes replied, "we'll need to run a blood test to check for specific toxins. Once we know what it is, we can treat him accordingly. But for you, you need to see a doctor. If your symptoms are related to the same source as Max's, it's important to get checked out." Linda felt a rush of emotions. Her chest tightened, her stomach churned, and for a moment she just sat there in silence, feeling the full weight of what had been happening in the quiet corners of her life. The apartment she had chosen for its peace and independence was now the very place that might be making her and Max sick. She thanked Dr. Hayes, her mind already racing with what steps to take next. She had to figure out what was wrong with her apartment. She had to protect Max, and she had to protect herself. But as she left the clinic holding Max's leash tightly, a new sense of urgency took over. She had to act fast before the toxins did any more damage. Max was her loyal companion, her protector, and now he had given her the wake-up call she needed. Something was wrong, and she was going to fix it, not just for Max, but for herself too. Linda's heart raced as she stood in the doorway of her apartment, her mind racing with the possible answers she had been searching for. The thought had been gnawing at her for weeks. What if something in her home was making both her and Max sick? The thought had seemed impossible at first, but now, after hearing from Dr. Hayes about Max's toxicity, the pieces were finally starting to fall into place. Could it really be something as invisible as carbon monoxide? She grabbed her phone and called Jake Morgan, a home safety expert Sarah had recommended, her voice tight with urgency. "I need you to check my apartment," she said, barely holding back the panic. "I think there's something in my home that's making me and my dog sick." Jake promised to come over as soon as possible, and when he arrived an hour later, Linda felt a surge of relief mixed with a creeping sense of dread. He wasted no time. His serious demeanor matched the gravity of her situation, and the fact that she had let this go on for so long without realizing it only made her more anxious. He pulled out his tools, starting with a portable carbon monoxide detector, and began checking every room with methodical precision. Linda paced anxiously, watching him move from room to room. Max, usually so alert and curious, lay on the couch, his energy completely drained. Linda felt a lump form in her throat as she thought back to how he used to chase after his favorite ball, tail wagging furiously, always eager for a walk or playtime. Now he barely even moved. It was as if both of them had been slowly fading, but the reason for it remained hidden, until now. Jake moved toward the kitchen, his detector beeping as he scanned the area. Linda's stomach clenched. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not getting a high reading," Jake said, his brow furrowed. "But something's off. Let me check the heater vent." Linda followed him nervously to the bedroom, where the vent near the bed had always been a source of warmth on cold nights. Jake knelt next to it, placing the detector against the metal. The soft beeping from the device quickened, signaling a problem. Linda felt her pulse spike as he turned the screen toward her. "Carbon monoxide," Jake said grimly, his voice carrying a heavy weight. "Low levels but constant exposure. That's your issue." Linda's heart sank. She felt a wave of disbelief wash over her, followed by a cold, chilling realization. She had been living in this apartment for months, breathing in toxic gas without even knowing it. Max had been affected too. That was why they both had been feeling so terrible. Jake continued, "You've been exposed to it over time. It's a slow leak from your heating system, and it's been building up without you noticing. Your symptoms, the dizziness, the exhaustion, the headaches, it all makes sense now. This gas is odorless, invisible, and it can cause severe health issues if left unchecked." Linda's knees weakened as the full impact of his words hit her. She had been slowly poisoning herself, and Max, without even knowing it. But she had caught it just in time. If she had continued to ignore the symptoms, if she had stayed in this apartment any longer, the consequences could have been deadly. Jake reassured her. "It's not life-threatening at this level, but prolonged exposure could have serious consequences. Headaches, nausea, neurological damage, even death. But the good news is, you're lucky. We found it before it got worse." Linda exhaled slowly, relief flooding her as she let the weight of the situation sink in. She had been too focused on work, on Max, and on life's pressures to notice what was really going on inside her apartment. Now she understood just how dangerous her ignorance had been. If she hadn't acted when she did, if she hadn't taken the steps to get help, it could have been too late. Jake made immediate arrangements to shut down the heating system and call in a specialist to fix the leak. Linda was instructed to open all the windows and get as much fresh air into the apartment as possible. The thought of breathing in clean, uncontaminated air felt like a lifeline. Later that evening, after the repairs had been made, Linda sat down on her couch, taking a deep breath. She could feel the difference already. The air in her apartment was fresher, lighter. The oppressive weight that had hung over her for so long was gone. Max, too, was starting to recover. His breathing was steady again, and there was a noticeable spark in his eyes. Linda knew she had narrowly escaped a catastrophe. She had almost lost Max, almost lost herself, because of something as invisible and silent as carbon monoxide. But now, with her home safe and Max by her side, she couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the quick thinking, for the support of her friends, and for the small, silent signs that had warned her just in time. This experience had opened her eyes in ways she couldn't have imagined. She would never again ignore the signs, whether they were her own health or the warning of a loyal dog. Sometimes, the smallest things, the most subtle shifts, were the ones that saved lives. For weeks, Linda had been fighting an invisible enemy. Her exhaustion, headaches, and dizziness had become so persistent that she almost accepted them as part of her daily routine. But what had started as a mere inconvenience spiraled into something much more sinister, and she never could have imagined that the root cause was lurking in her very own apartment. It wasn't until Max's strange behavior and a timely visit from a safety expert revealed the presence of a carbon monoxide leak that Linda realized just how close she had come to disaster. Now, with the leak repaired and her apartment finally aired out, Linda was beginning to feel the weight of the situation lift. She woke up that first morning after the repairs with a sense of relief she hadn't experienced in weeks. Her body felt lighter, her mind clearer, and the fog that had clouded her thoughts was slowly dissolving. Max, too, seemed to be recovering. His movements were less sluggish, his breathing steadier, and his tail, which had been drooping for so long, was wagging again. It was in this quiet moment of recovery that Linda realized how close they both had come to serious harm. Max, her loyal companion, had been the one to alert her to the danger. His odd behavior, his restlessness at night, the strange whimpers, and his decision to stop eating had seemed baffling at the time. She had chalked it up to stress, to him simply adjusting to a new home. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, she could see it all so clearly. Max had sensed something was wrong long before she had, his body reacting to the poison in the air in ways she hadn't understood. Linda couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Max wasn't just her dog. He had been her guardian, in a way, even when she hadn't realized it. His instinctual behavior had saved their lives. If he hadn't been acting strange, if he hadn't tugged at her blanket that night, she might have continued to ignore the signs, growing sicker and sicker until it was too late. Max had been the one to show her the small, unspoken signs, his reluctance to leave the bedroom, his refusal to eat, and his persistent discomfort. That had alerted her to the danger. Sitting on the couch with Max curled up beside her, Linda felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She hadn't realized just how bad it had gotten until she could finally breathe clearly again, until she could finally feel her energy returning. She couldn't help but think about how many people never got that second chance. How many people didn't realize the danger they were in until it was too late. Max had acted as her silent hero, his strange behavior a warning that saved them both from what could have been a deadly outcome. Looking at him now, lying contentedly at her feet, Linda couldn't help but smile. She had adopted Max with the hope of finding companionship, but what she hadn't expected was to find such a profound bond, a bond that went beyond just shared space and affection. It was a bond of mutual protection, one that transcended words. Max had not only been a source of comfort and loyalty, but he had also become her protector in the most unexpected way. She had always known that animals had an incredible sense of intuition, but this experience had proven just how deeply connected they could be to the well-being of their owners. Max had been the first one to sense the invisible threat in their home, and now, with the danger gone, Linda couldn't imagine her life without him. She leaned down, giving him a soft scratch behind the ears. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing that no words could ever truly express the depth of her gratitude. Max responded with a contented sigh, leaning into her touch as if to say that it was all in a day's work. As Linda looked out the window, watching the sunlight pour into the apartment, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had come so close to losing everything, but now she was given a second chance. A chance to truly appreciate the love and companionship she had in Max. She would never again take for granted the small signs, the quiet warnings, and the extraordinary bond she shared with her dog. Life was fragile, and in that fragile space, love was the most powerful force of all. It was Max's love, his constant presence, that had saved her life, and for that, Linda would always be grateful. After everything Linda had been through, the last thing she wanted was to keep her terrifying experience a secret. She had narrowly escaped disaster, and she knew that if her story could save even one person or animal, it was worth sharing. The silent killer that had nearly taken her life, the carbon monoxide leak in her apartment, was invisible, odorless, and deadly. Yet so many people, just like her, were unaware of the dangers lurking in their homes. It had taken one simple conversation with Jake, the safety inspector, to realize just how close she had come to losing everything. Max, her loyal companion, had acted as her early warning system, his strange behavior alerting her to a threat she couldn't see, feel, or smell. But what if she hadn't noticed? What if Max hadn't acted out of character? She shuddered to think about it. That night, after everything had settled, after the repairs were made, and she felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders, Linda made a promise to herself. She would use her experience to help others. It started with a post. Linda sat down at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she took a deep breath. She had never been one to share personal stories on social media, but this wasn't just about her. It was about making sure no one else went through what she had. She began typing, sharing the details of her experience, the exhaustion, the headaches, the strange behavior from Max. She told everyone about the carbon monoxide leak that had nearly taken both of them down. She wrote about how she had ignored the signs for so long, chalking them up to stress until it was almost too late. "Please," she wrote, "if you haven't already, check your homes. Get a carbon monoxide detector. Don't wait until it's too late. I nearly lost everything, and I don't want anyone else to make the same mistake." The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the post was shared hundreds of times. Friends, family, and even strangers flooded her comments section with messages of thanks, stories of their own experiences, and an outpouring of support. It was as if Linda had ignited a movement. People were checking their homes, some were buying detectors, and others were even scheduling inspections. Her story had reached people in a way she hadn't expected, and it was giving them the knowledge and tools to protect themselves. The more Linda thought about it, the more determined she became. She couldn't just stop with a post. This needed to go beyond social media. People needed to understand the risks and how easy it was to prevent something so tragic from happening. She began researching local safety campaigns, and soon she found herself speaking at community centers, schools, and even local businesses. Linda shared her story with anyone who would listen, explaining the importance of carbon monoxide detectors and regular home inspections. She also knew that it wasn't just about raising awareness. It was about changing the mindset of those who thought it could never happen to them. Like Linda, they didn't realize that carbon monoxide poisoning could affect anyone, anytime, in any home. It wasn't about being careless or negligent. It was about an invisible threat that most people didn't even know they should be worried about. Max had been her savior. His unusual behavior had saved her life, and now Linda was determined to make sure no one else had to go through what they had. Her voice became louder, her message clearer. "Don't wait for a warning sign. Protect yourself, your family, and your pets. Make sure your home is safe." The impact was real, and Linda couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment every time she heard about someone who had taken action. It wasn't just about saving her life. It was about saving others. And it all started with one post, one story shared. Her vulnerability had turned into strength, and now she was making a difference, one home at a time. Sometimes it only takes one person to make a change, to shift the conversation, and to make sure others don't go through what she had to. Linda knew that her life, and Max's, had been saved by one simple act, paying attention. And now, she was doing everything she could to make sure others paid attention too. It's easy to forget the silent dangers around us, the things that exist without being seen or felt, but that can slowly drain our lives. Linda never thought something like carbon monoxide poisoning could happen to her, let alone that it would go unnoticed until it was almost too late. But after weeks of feeling sick, exhausted, and disconnected, she learned a valuable, life-altering lesson. It wasn't just about the toxicity in her apartment. It was about the unspoken love and protection that came from her dog, Max, that had saved her life. Max had been more than just a pet. He was Linda's companion, her constant in the quiet moments after she moved into her new apartment. When she first adopted him from the shelter, it was because she needed someone by her side, someone who would offer the comfort of companionship in a place that still felt new and empty. What she didn't know, though, was that Max would be the one to protect her from an unseen, silent killer. Max's behavior had always been steady and calm. He was her quiet protector at night, curling up at the foot of her bed and offering a sense of security. But one night, when he started acting strangely, Linda didn't understand the warning signs. At first, she chalked it up to stress or just the usual quirks of a rescue dog settling into a new home. But as the days went on, Max's sluggishness mirrored Linda's own increasing fatigue, and his labored breathing became more pronounced. She noticed how tired he seemed, how little energy he had, and how he no longer greeted her with the same enthusiasm. His changes were subtle, but they made Linda uneasy. When Max started to get worse, she realized how much they had in common. Max wasn't just a dog. He was her first responder, her silent alarm system. He had noticed the dangers long before Linda did. His actions, his refusal to leave her side, and his strange, almost frantic attempts to warn her, these were all signs she had ignored. Max had been trying to protect her. In his own way, he was telling her that something wasn't right. And when Linda was finally forced to acknowledge the problem, she realized how much she owed him. He had been her constant companion, but in this moment, he had also been her savior. As Linda started to recover, and the truth came to light, that the slow poisoning from the carbon monoxide leak in her apartment had been affecting them both, she felt a deep, overwhelming gratitude. She had been blinded by exhaustion and stress, but Max had been there, watching over her, in ways she had never fully appreciated before. It wasn't just about his presence, it was about his quiet vigilance, his instinctive need to care for her, even when she didn't realize it was necessary. He had saved her life, not by force or aggression, but simply by being there, alert to the danger she couldn't see. In the aftermath of the repair, after the air in her apartment was fresh again and the toxic gas was gone, Linda found herself reflecting on the true nature of love and protection. Max had been there when she needed him most, and his devotion went beyond what she could have imagined. Their bond was more than just companionship. It was a bond of survival, of mutual care that transcended words. Through this terrifying ordeal, Linda learned to never take Max's loyalty for granted again. But more importantly, she learned the value of vigilance in the face of silent dangers. She learned that love is often quiet, patient, and protective. It doesn't always come with grand gestures or loud declarations. It comes with small actions, with attentiveness, and with the ability to recognize when something isn't quite right. Max had seen it all before she did. Determined to make sure others didn't fall into the same trap, Linda began sharing her story. She couldn't ignore the fact that so many people lived in similar situations, unaware of the silent threats around them. She vowed to make sure others knew the importance of carbon monoxide detectors, of regular home inspections, and of recognizing when something feels off. In the end, Linda realized that love isn't just about the warm, cozy feelings. It's about being there for each other, in both the quiet and the dangerous moments. Max had given her that lesson, and now it was time to pass it on. Through his love and protection, he had taught her the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest dangers are the ones we cannot see, but they can be prevented with awareness, care, and a little help from those who love us.